will continue throughout the night, so quite a wet 24 hours to come here. Elsewhere, some of those showers will ease off throughout the night, allowing for some clearer spells to develop, and underneath those clearer spells, and because the winds are a touch lighter compared to recent nights, temperatures will dip away a bit more, down to around 11-12 degrees Celsius. Where you have those clear spells overnight, it means that you'll be greeted by a good amount of sunshine first thing on Monday morning, and many of us will see those sunny spells throughout the day. Still some scattered showers bubbling up throughout the afternoon, particularly central, eastern, southeastern areas of England could see some of those turning quite heavy with some thunderstorms and hail in the mix here. But again, in that sunshine, temperatures climb to highs of around 18 to 23 degrees Celsius. Some longer spells of rain possible for some of us, though, as we head towards Tuesday. Otherwise, enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Read my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning.
and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo, a teeming tavern of politics, arts, culture, topical debate, and a sense of the ridiculous. Some excellent guests stand ready for the next 2 hours. I shall start with Ukraine. Is it disappointed not to receive a firmer commitment on joining NATO from this week's summit in Vilnius? I'll speak to the advisor to the country's Minister of Defence and to David Patrikarakos, one of this country's most seasoned war correspondents, who's recently returned from the front line. After that, we'll switch to England's greatest playwright with a father and son who are trailblazers in the study and performance of Shakespeare. David Crystal, a scholar of linguistics, and his son, the actor Ben Crystal, have written a book with a Shakespeare quote for every day of the year. And a writer almost as prolific as the great bard, Taylor Swift, continues her headline-grabbing Eras tour. Tickets for the 13 shows that she's performing in the United Kingdom have been on sale all week in staggered phases in order to cope with the frenzy of demand. She's typically beloved by female fans, but we've collected some of the lesser-spotted male variety to explain why her appeal is universal. And a confession, at this point, I am myself something of a Swiftie. As I'm sure is Stefan Kyriazis, who will be updating us, as always, on the theatre with Mark Rylance's latest role. Later on, you can come on a private tour with me around the wonderful exhibition at the National Gallery entitled After Impressionism, Inventing Modern Art. But before all of that, let's get the latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Michael, thank you, and good morning to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom today is that the UK has become the first European country to formally join the Indo-Pacific trade bloc, potentially paving the way to £12 trillion worth of global business. Business and Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch, who's in Auckland signing the deal, says the deal will bring British businesses a step closer to selling to a market of over 500 million people with fewer of the barriers. Some everyday items from countries within the bloc, such as Australian UGG boots, for example, could become cheaper for consumers. It's estimated the agreement will come into effect towards the end of 2024. Well, Nigel Huddleston, International Trade Minister, says the deal will help grow the UK economy.
We're talking about billions of pounds of additional economic activity right across the country. It will benefit every nation and region of the UK. It's not just about where we are now, but where this could go in the future as well, because we expect the membership of CPTPP to expand over the coming years. So I wouldn't be too obsessed with the current numbers. This is about the potential growth for the UK economy.
Well, in response, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says that the trade deal is a start, but he said more is needed.
Any trade deal is good. I wouldn't call this one massive, but it's certainly not a plan for growth. And the problem is we've not had a plan for growth for 13 years under this government. We still haven't got a plan for growth. So, yes, look, a trade deal is always a step in the right direction, but this is not a plan for growth, and it's that failure to have a plan for growth that's left us in the economic mess that we're in.
Now, in other news today, the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace will give up his government position at the next cabinet reshuffle and not stand as an MP at the next general election. That's according to today's Sunday Times newspaper. It comes just days after the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak rejected comments made by Mr Wallace suggesting Ukraine should show more gratitude for the military support the UK's given. And Matt Goodwin, Professor of Politics at the University of Kent, says it represents wider problems for the Conservative Party.
This is coming only a few days before those very awkward by-elections for Rishi Sunak. It's coming amidst a wider sense in the country that the Conservatives are in disarray. We've got 40 Conservatives standing down at the next election. This is a seismic number for the Conservative Party, and it all adds to a sense that people are now really concluding that this party is heading for defeat and it's time to do something different.
Surgical procedures for more than 8,000 children have been cancelled in Scotland since 2019. That's according to the Liberal Democrats. They're describing the newly released data as a badge of shame for the SNP government. The Scottish Liberal Democrats say many operations were cancelled due to a lack of staff or equipment. A Scottish government spokesperson has responded saying the impact of COVID-19 on the normal day-to-day running of the NHS could not be underestimated. The Home Secretary has published a letter to Sir Keir Starmer claiming a Labour staffer met with Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion in private meetings. Suella Braverman claimed that internal memos from Just Stop Oil showed MP Jess Morden met with the environmental groups to sell them on how Labour is driven by the environment. The Home Secretary called for the sacking of Miss Morden and for all office holders within the party to cut contact with what she called extremist groups. Former soldiers could be called on to join a reserve force in future crises. That's according to the Sunday Telegraph, which has reported today it's all part of a planned overhaul of the military, which would reduce the British Army to its smallest size since the Napoleonic Wars. Ministers are expected to defend the proposals, part of the long-awaited Defence Command paper, insisting the war in Ukraine shows how UK forces can become more agile. The army currently consists of more than 75,000 personnel, with the paper reporting the government intends plans to cut it to 73,000. You're with GB News, more news as it happens. This is Britain's news channel.
Thank you very much, Polly Middlehurst. The NATO summit in Vilnius this week was hotly anticipated as the moment when the alliance might announce a firm timetable for Ukraine to become a member. But such hopes were dashed when the United States President Joe Biden let it be known on the eve of the summit that the time isn't right for Ukraine to join, with the final communique saying that Kiev will be admitted, quotes, when allies agree and the conditions are met, end of quote. The summit had one breakthrough, however, as Turkish President Erdogan dropped his objections to Sweden's NATO membership. Separately, the United States has agreed to send Ukraine cluster munitions. Many countries ban them because scattered, unexploded bomblets are a long-term danger to civilians. To discuss all of that and to give us a sense of the challenges faced by Ukraine now, I'm joined by Yuriy Sak, who is the advisor to the Minister of Defence in Ukraine, and a foreign correspondent who's covered the war in Ukraine since the beginning, David Patrikarakos. Yuri, I used to be Defence Secretary, admittedly more than a quarter of a century ago. I did not expect NATO to set out a timetable for Ukrainian membership. Did you really expect it? Are you really disappointed?
Michael, as our president said after the NATO summit in Vilnius, this was a good summit for Ukraine, but it would have been ideal, of course, if we would have received a clearer timetable as regards our full membership. Now, we are confident, and I think everybody understands, that Ukraine will be safer with NATO, and NATO, what's more importantly, will be stronger with Ukraine as a full member. At the same time, you know, we are adequate. We are not out of our mind. We understand that there is a North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and we understand that a country which currently has a war cannot be a full member. So it's, you know, plus we have received a very comprehensive security guarantees from the G7 countries. So, you know, everything that happened in Vilnius is a temporary measure. At the end of the summit, most world leaders have said that after the war ends, Ukraine will become a member of NATO. So we're quietly optimistic, and we'll just keep moving forward.
Yuri, there is an alternative view, which is that when this war ends, and maybe with the change of leadership in Russia, you know, we would look to a long-term relationship between the West and Russia. But let's face it, NATO is an alliance principally established to resist Russia. I mean, do you really believe that it's appropriate on the long term for Ukraine to be a member of what is basically an anti-Russian alliance?
Well, absolutely. I'm a Ukrainian, and my nation has been the victim of Russians' genocidal intents for centuries now. So we understand that whatever happens in Russia after our victory on the battlefield, whoever succeeds the current regime, we all, and I mean all of us in Europe, we will all have to be vigilant, and we all have to improve our security. NATO, as a collective security structure, will stay in place, and I'm confident that Ukraine needs to become a member of NATO, and I think our allies are confident that this has to happen as well.
Yuri, say a word, if you would, please, about cluster bombs. Why does Ukraine need them?
Well, Michael, look, last night, Russians have attacked, for example, the second largest Ukrainian city of Kharkiv with S-300 missiles. Now, these are not cluster munitions. These are as you would know, these are anti-aircraft missiles, which Russians use as ground-to-ground missiles. Now, each one of these missiles is filled with thousands of little steel, if you like, pieces of shrapnel, and they're using them on the civilian residential areas. Plus, Russians have been using cluster munitions on civilian cities since day one of this aggressive war. Now, we need the cluster munitions just to help us break through the defense lines. We have said it very clearly, and our Minister of Defense, Alexei Reznikov, has given these assurances in writing that we will use the cluster munitions only on the battlefield, only against our enemy. We will record every use of the cluster munitions, and these zones will, after the war, be prioritized for the demining efforts.
Were you upset by Ben Wallace's remark in which he implied that Ukraine ought to be showing more gratitude and said that the West wasn't Amazon? Were you upset by that, or were you able to take it as a sort of joke?
See, Michael, if this was said by somebody like, I don't know, Donald Trump, then I would be, but when we heard this from Ben Wallace, of course, we just couldn't get our heads around, because Ben Wallace has been and continues to be one of the, strongest supporters of Ukraine. Thanks to Ben Wallace personally and to his relationship with our Minister of Defense, Alexei Reznikov, Britain was the first, United Kingdom gave us the first tanks, Challenger 2. The United Kingdom gave us the first long-range missile, Storm Shadow. The United Kingdom, we know from the latest news, has already trained more than 18,000 Ukrainian servicemen. So, and every time we communicate, we say thank you. We say thank you to the British people. We say thank you to the UK government. We say thank you to your country overall. So I don't think, it was a misunderstanding. As far as I understand, Ben Wallace also said that his words came across not the way he intended them to come across. But look, I just want to say, we sincerely are very grateful to our allies, because we understand that for us it's a war of survival. In this war of survival, we depend on the unwavering support of our allies.
You've many reasons, I suppose, in Ukraine to be at least equally grateful to Joe Biden. And in your answer there, you just mentioned Donald Trump. I wonder with what nervousness you look towards the American political scene and the possibility of a change of regime in Washington.
Michael, I wouldn't want to speculate and meddle with the domestic affairs of one of our most important strategic partners. Now, but I can say that I personally went to Washington, D.C. on a number of occasions during this war, and I spoke with the representatives of both the Republican and Democrat Party. And of course, I understand that, elections are elections, domestic politics are domestic politics. But when it comes to strategic issues, I think Ukraine will continue to benefit from the bipartisan support, no matter what happens in the U.S. During these elections, because everybody understands what kind of threat Russia poses, right? Everybody understands that overnight it can spill over to the West, and that will be no longer a time when the West will be able to just support Ukraine with weapons, right? So we still have a window of opportunity to end this war in Ukraine, on the Ukrainian territory. Let's use it.
How should we interpret what is going on in the Ukrainian counter-offensive? What is happening?
Michael, if you consider that we are conducting these offensive operations without air power, which is something we've been requesting our allies to provide us with for a long time. So you ask any military expert, is the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which is going on along the 900 kilometers front line, so considering they don't have air power, is it going well? And it is going exceptionally well. We are pushing the enemy, we're moving forward. In some places, we are trapping the enemy, we're destroying their life force, their personnel, their military equipment. If to those who think that this is not going too fast, if it's as if I ask somebody to dig a hole and gave them a spoon, and I said, and then after a while I'd say, why are you digging so slow? I'd say, well, you need to give them a spade, right? So we've got some spades, but I think there is still more that we need, like long-range missiles, ATACMS, F-16s, and I think, in the meantime, we will continue to do what we do best: smart war, using drone warfare, taking advantage of the enemy's weaknesses, identifying their vulnerabilities along the front line. And I would like to stress that we have not committed our major forces yet, so that's still ahead.
Do you think that the absence of the Wagner Group, and indeed the instability in Russia, has proved to be an advantage to you yet?
It hasn't translated into any tactical, operative, or strategic advantage on the battlefield. But of course, whatever makes Russia weaker makes Ukraine stronger and makes our victory closer. So we watch carefully, the developments in this failed terrorist state, Russia, and we see that not all is good in the Dutch kingdom, and I think that they are headed towards an inevitable disaster, both on the battlefield in Ukraine as well as domestically in Russia.
Yuriy Sak, I thank you very much for your eloquence. Thank you for coming on the programme this morning. We did intend to have also David Patriarcharakos. Unfortunately, the communications weren't with us on that one. But thank you very much, Yuriy. You are watching Michael Portillo on GB News. It's Britain's news channel. After the break, the father and son duo who are pioneering ways to make Shakespeare more widely accessible.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. We are still holding onto a relatively fresh breeze for many of us through Sunday. Low pressure is gradually pushing its way northwards from the UK, but there's still plenty of isobars on the chart, and particularly for southern areas of Scotland down into northeast England, we could see gusts of 40 miles per hour throughout the day, so quite blustery. Longer spells of rain for western Scotland. Elsewhere, there'll be some scattered heavy showers around, thunderstorms perhaps in places as well. Some localised flooding across Aberdeenshire is possible. But where you see some of the sunnier spells in between, temperatures climb to highs around 20, 22 degrees Celsius, but feeling much cooler underneath that more persistent cloud and rain in the northwest, and that will continue throughout the night. So quite a wet 24 hours to come here. Elsewhere, some of those showers will ease off throughout the night, allowing for some clearer spells to develop, and underneath those clearer spells, and because the winds are a touch lighter compared to recent nights, temperatures will dip away a bit more, down to around 11, 12 degrees Celsius. Where you have those clear spells overnight, it means that you'll be greeted by a good amount of sunshine first thing on Monday morning, and many of us will see those sunny spells throughout the day. Still some scattered showers bubbling up throughout the afternoon, and particularly central, eastern, southeastern areas of England could see some of those turning quite heavy with some thunderstorms and hail in the mixture. But again, in that sunshine, temperatures climb to highs of around 18 to 23 degrees Celsius. Some longer spells of rain possible for some of us, though, as we head towards Tuesday. Otherwise, enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Welcome back. It's a wise father that knows his own child, said England's greatest writer, and it could have been written for my next guest. I'm joined by a father and son duo who have lent their formidable and complementary skills to increasing our understanding of Shakespeare. David Crystal is an honorary professor of linguistics at Bangor University, and his son Ben, a Shakespearean actor. The pair has pioneered our understanding of the original pronunciation of Shakespeare's work, capturing the sounds of his words as they would have been spoken then. While David provides the scholarly heft to that endeavour, Ben has illustrated those studies to audiences with workshops and performances all over the world. Between them, they produced 5 books, mostly about our national bard, and the latest is Everyday Shakespeare, Lines for Life. Great pleasure to welcome you both, David and Ben.
Great to be here.
Shall we start with the book? So 365 or 6 days in the year, and we have a quote for every day. I looked up my birthday. How many goodly creatures are there here? How beauteous mankind is. That's a wonderfully
very
quote.
Appropriate.
Well,
yes.
on my birthday, I gather friends, and they tend to make an effort and, look pretty good. And I could say that on my birthday, how beauteous mankind is.
Straight out of The Tempest, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
It is indeed.
And I think that's the perfect example of why we wrote it and called it Everyday Shakespeare, that these are lines that you could feel, that you could quite easily drop into a moment like that, or even, your everyday conversation.
Yeah, but not to show off. You didn't intend this to be a show-off handbook, did you?
No, we wanted it to be a bridge, really. I think I grew up with the idea that Shakespeare is quite inaccessible and you have to have a particular background.
You did?
Oh, yeah, I hated Shakespeare in school. Really couldn't stand it.
True.
And I think...
What was that, bad parenting?
No.
I blame the parents.
But we've spent our career as our careers have overlapped with the 5 books we've written together, I suppose they've each been about building bridges towards Shakespeare and hopefully making these incredible works more accessible.
Yeah, because these are everyday quotes. You see, when people think of Shakespeare, they always think of the really famous quotes, like, a horse, my kingdom for a horse. Well, how often, Michael, have you had to say that in life? Not very often. Or, is this a dagger that I see before me? You haven't seen a dagger before you ever. And most people have.
I was in politics,
Oh, you're right. It would have been a very appropriate one.
I might have. Changing the subject a tiny bit. Well, first of all, I know you want to mention that you're going to be at the British Library on Tuesday. What is that about?
Well, this is the first, it's Litfest time of year. It's always Litfest in this country somewhere or other. But we're doing a number of talks around literary festivals between now and Christmas. And the British Library one on Tuesday evening is the first time we're going to actually have a chance to talk about the book for 3/4 of an hour or so and illustrate what's in it. So that's the event.
We've both worked at the British Library a fair bit over the years. Dad's curated an exhibition there. I curated the Shakespeare birthday celebrations in 2016. And, of course, it's the 50th anniversary of the British Library this year. And this talk's part of that, 7 o'clock on Tuesday evening.
Ben, you have the most lovely actor's voice. And so I'm going to just set you up. Would you prepare some lines that you could read to us
yes,
at the end of all this? But let's just cover first also this original pronunciation. Now, is this particularly your baby?
Well, yes, in a way, but it's prompted by Shakespeare's Globe. You see, when Shakespeare's Globe started in the south there, they wanted original theatre as best they could, original costumes, original music, original movement around the stage and everything. But for many years, they didn't do original pronunciation. That was because they thought that people wouldn't understand it. You know, 400 years ago, pronunciation has changed a lot, they thought. So it was really a bit of a brave action by Tim Carroll, the director there, in 2004, doing a production of Romeo and Juliet. And he rang me up and said, David, you know about the history of English pronunciation. Do you think we could do Romeo in OP, as they call it, original pronunciation?
Do you want to try me on it? Do you want to see whether I would understand original pronunciation?
Well, yeah, I mean, the best way to do it, I think, is for to get the contrast. If Ben does a short bit and to hear it in modern English, and then I'll do it in OP, and you'll hear the contrast. So
a short bit, so just the entirety of To Be or Not to Be, then? Or...
well, yeah, later.
Okay. All right. So how about this from one of the sonnets? When to the sessions of sweet, silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's waste.
Now, this is a sonnet, Michael, so every couplet has got to rhyme exactly, because that's the way sonnets were. So did you notice? Things past, my dear time's waste. Come on, Shakespeare, what's going on? I mean, are you really a bad poet? No, of course you're not. What's happened is that the pronunciation has shifted. So this is
Are you sure about that?
I can tell you why in just a sec.
Okay,
but let's hear it first of all in OP, and then you'll get the sense of it. When to the sessions of sweet, silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's wast. So past and wast then rhyme perfectly. Now, everybody says, how do you know? How do you know? And there are three ways in which you know. First of all, you look at all those rhymes in Shakespeare that don't work in modern English, and you think...
But they work on the page. You can see the relation between the words on the page.
Some do, some don't. But you know, that's the first piece of evidence.
And you're talking about a time when 80% of people were illiterate as well, so there's eye
They
rhymes.
weren't seeing it on the page.
Yeah, they wouldn't have seen it anyway. And then the second kind of evidence is the spellings. You know, spelling wasn't standard like it is today, and often the spellings represent the pronunciation, so that's another kind of evidence. And then the third and the most important kind of evidence is the fact that people wrote books at the end of the 16th and early 17th century saying how words were to be pronounced. So you put all of that together and you get that kind of very interesting accent. I mean, you'll notice some of the features of it. The R is pronounced after a vowel, for instance. You know, it's heart, not heart. Words like old woes, not old woes. You know, it's old woes. And then dear, for example, and times, that I sound that's in there. And these are the features that, not just me, I mean, I'm standing on the shoulders of people who have been studying this kind of thing for over 100 years. But I was the first to try and actually put it into practice in a theatrical context.
Are some audiences delighted with this because it is closer to the way they're speaking than, say, the way I speak?
Yeah. Well, you speak very nicely.
Well, but I speak, I think, in a very modern way. That's what you're telling me.
I think that's the thing that caught my interest in original pronunciation. I grew up with the idea that Shakespeare should sound in a particular accent. Indeed, actors are still going to drama school and being told they don't have the right accent for Shakespeare. And this exploration was a real game changer and field leveler, I think, because everyone that comes to hear Shakespeare in original pronunciation come away from the sound saying, oh, that sounds like me. I recognise my own accent in it.
You speak like that where I come from. That was the standard reaction. You know, people hear words like them old, and they think, oh, that's Welsh, you see, or something. Or they hear like day for day, and that's Yorkshire, you know. And there's a bit of that all over the place in here. And the Americans, of course, love it because the R after the vowel.
Yes, so to come away from Shakespeare with familiarity, I think, is a real important thing.
I want to cover one more topic, because another thing that you are doing is you're doing quick productions. You'll need to explain what those are, but again, it's in the name of authenticity, or certainly getting back to old practice.
I think authenticity is a really dangerous term. I think that's something that the Shakespeare's Globe has you know, people have tried to saddle that institution with. When you look at how Shakespeare would have been done 400 years ago, whether it's architecturally or in terms of some sort of rehearsal or production practice, there's certainly things to be learned. Now, we know that they would have had, instead of the 6 to 10 weeks of rehearsal that Shakespeare has nowadays, they would have had about 3 days or 6 mornings. 18 hours, basically. And so I've been exploring for the last 10 years, raising Shakespeare in, well, we started with 2 weeks, then we gave ourselves 5 days. We average about 3 days, and I've raised a Shakespeare production in a day as well. And the thing is that this rehearsal process is written into the fabric, into the DNA of the writing, because, of course, Shakespeare was writing these plays knowing his actors were limited on time. So there is a way to do it, and not just do it, but do it incredibly well. And it's been a fascinating exploration.
It's electrifying. I mean,
every performance is different.
Yeah, but the biggest
different
problem
every night.
The biggest problem you keep telling me about acting is how to make the lines sound fresh after 6 weeks of rehearsal. You know.
Yeah.
Well, with just 3 days, those lines sound fresh.
Talking of fresh lines, have you got a little piece?
Sure.
20 to 30 seconds worth, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's one...
best actorly voice.
In my best actorly voice, my goodness. Well, here's one at the beginning of October. Here, being thus together, we are an endless mind to one another. We are one another's wife, ever begetting new births of love. We are father, friends, acquaintance. We are in one another families. I am your heir and you are mine. This place is our inheritance. No hard oppressor dare take this from us. Here, with a little patience, we shall live long and loving.
That was absolutely magnificent. So if you want to find lines like that every day of the year, maybe for your birthday or whatever, Everyday Shakespeare, Lines for Life. Thank you very much to David and Ben Crystal. I turn now to a wordsmith of more recent vintage, and I'll brook no sneering or condescension when I say the name, Taylor Swift. Despite her heavily female-skewed fandom, more and more men are emerging from the shadows to state openly and proudly that she is one of the great songwriters and performing artists of all time, and I take this moment to nail my own colours to the mast as a Swiftie. Tickets for her UK dates of the Eras tour went on sale this week, and I believe both of my guests will be going. I'm joined by Matthew Maguire, who I'm sure will infuriate many viewers when he says that he booked his tickets with relative ease, and books editor at The Spectator, Alexander Larman. Matthew, why are you a Swiftie?
Great. Thank you so much for having me here. That intro actually just gave me goosebumps. I think that was really, really stirring. Fantastic stuff. First and foremost, love her songs. I think she has a real skill at kind of putting people at the heart of the story she's telling. And she just makes me emotional, really, like no other artist does. So whatever the mood, whatever the vibe, you can put her on and it will just be fantastic because you're right at the heart of that story. And I think that's amazing.
Alexander, one of the reasons that I am a Swiftie is I admire her so much. I think she has the most extraordinary work ethic. When I look, for example, at what was happening during lockdown, as I recall, she recorded 2 new albums. She also took the time to re-record huge amounts of her own material to which she had lost the copyright, so these are now available as Taylor's version. Is that one of the reasons why you admire her, Alexander?
Well, I mean, I admire anyone who works hard, Michael. I mean, I think that's fair to say. But The main reason why I think Taylor Swift is so amazing is that, to me, she's the most talented female artist who has emerged in the last 50 years, because she's somebody who you can compare to Madonna, except she's infinitely more talented than Madonna. But what I also think is that, I mean, you've got to look back to David Bowie for somebody who is that versatile, who can keep on reinventing themselves, keep on changing their image, and keep coming out with fantastic albums. I mean, if you look at her rate of work and her consistency of excellence over the last few years, I mean, when does she sleep? And she's now going on this world tour, which is going to last for years. And it's going to net her hundreds of millions of dollars. And she deserves every single penny, as far as I'm concerned, because she is a once-in-a-generation talent, and I think she's absolutely brilliant.
Matthew, we were just talking about pronunciation in the Shakespearean period. Taylor Swift does take some liberties with rhyme. She rhymes carrigan with cardigan. Does that sort of thing bother you? And perhaps I could just link that to a comment on her sense of humour, a recent song, It's Me, I'm the Problem, It's Me, at tea time, everyone agrees. I mean, that's pretty funny, isn't it? I mean, obviously in a rather sad way, but it's quite a comical line.
Yeah, I think there's certainly no other artists I can think about where the lyrics are thought about and discussed constantly. So, you know, whenever any new song comes out, it's let's look at the lyrics, what Easter eggs are hiding in there, what's she done. She's so creative with her storytelling and her writing that it just really lures you in. And actually, you kind of forget that some of that is quite simplistic because you're always looking for deeper meanings. And what does she mean by that? Why has she rhymed cardigan with car again? Like, there must be something in there. So you're constantly, it's like a puzzle. Every song's a puzzle and you're always trying to solve it. And I think that's part of the charm. Like, you listen to songs again and again and again, and every time there's something else that you notice. It's so layered. So yeah, I think that's fair. I'm always looking at those lyrics.
Alexandra, I suppose one of the reasons why we tend to think of having female fans is that some of the material is written for very young people. I mean, it seems like kind of teenage girls. And even in her recent work, in one album, she has Cardigan, Betty, August, which are about a teenage love affair. Way back, she had You Belong to Me, one of her most famous songs, 22. So quite often she's writing down to a teenage audience, which I guess shouldn't, on the face of it, attract people like the three people involved in this discussion right now.
But I think it's testament to her absolute genius for what she can do, is she can span generations. I mean, my 7-year-old daughter adores her as well. And it's one of the funny things that actually we like her on much the same level, because we adore the music and we adore the simplicity of some of the lyrics. But also, as we were just saying a second ago, it's the way that what she does so cleverly, it's that she conceals these very subtle Easter eggs in a lot of her lyrics and in a lot of the songs. I mean, for instance, when her song London Boy came out a few years ago, it was, first of all, it was ridiculed because it was thought to be a bit gauche, and all these lines about going up to Highgate and hanging out with her boyfriend's mates. And then if you break it down a bit more, it's like, it's clearly not designed to be this rather silly love song. It's a parody of that kind of song. And you can see that she's working on a very subtle level, both intellectually and musically. And so I think that's why she's appealing to everyone. I mean, obviously, of course she has vast appeal to young women. Of course she's massively relatable. Of course, you know, she's had a very well-documented love life, which has been all over tabloids and the press for years. But also, I think she's somebody who can take her image and can run with it, and she can subvert her image from within. And I think that's what's a testament to how versatile she is and how Bowie-ish she is as well, which I think is the highest accolade I can give anyone.
Matthew, it's sometimes hard to believe that one woman can have suffered so much in love. I'm not talking about her personal story, I'm talking about the songs. So many of them are about anguish and disappointment and nostalgia for an affair that's gone wrong. Is that attractive to a guy like you?
Yeah, for a guy like me, certainly. I'm a big fan of love. I watch any rom-com out there. I adore those feelings and exploring those feelings. I think it can be a challenge for some men. I do have some friends and colleagues that certainly wouldn't feel the same way, and will probably repeat the trope that, it's boring, that just hearing another breakup song. But I also think it's important that we listen to those songs as men and kind of confront some of those feelings. I mean, there are songs that I listen to sometimes and I'm like, wow, that guy behaved really poorly. And it does make me want to kind of, I suppose, improve and kind of start having those conversations about what we can do in relationships to be a bit better as men. So, but yeah, look, I'm well aware that that's probably not a complete feeling amongst men everywhere. But hey, we can do what we can to talk about it and try and change some of that perception, because I think it's important to listen to those views and kind of reflect on our role within that.
Alexander, amazingly, she's already had a long career, but she's still in her early 30s. Have you any idea where she's going to go in future decades?
Well, what's been so interesting is that those two sort of folk albums that she released during lockdown, I mean, those two, Folklore and Evermore, I think they're astonishingly accomplished. They're obviously a massive move away from kind of high-energy pop and indeed country music that she was already known for. So, I mean, she has literally the world as her oyster. I mean, there is nobody out there, I mean, literally not a single recording artist who has more options, more opportunity to do exactly what she likes. I mean, she's going to write and direct a film quite soon. There will inevitably be a memoir. I mean, she already acts in films, including, regrettably, Cats. But I think that she is this incredibly exciting figure, and I feel that looking at her from, you know, a Swiftie perspective, I cannot wait to see what she does next. And I feel that having the world at her fingertips is just the most exciting thing, and if anyone is capable of doing something extraordinary, it's her.
Shakespeare followed by Taylor Swift, only on GB News. Thank you to Alexander Larman and Matthew Maguire. I really enjoyed that. Stay with us as Stefan Kyriazis will share the latest from the world of theatre, talking about Mark Rylance's current role. That will be after a short break.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Da-da-da-da-dum, etc.
That's the whole point. But bomb.
And action.
Sergeant,
Read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Mark Rylance is winning typically stellar reviews for a new play which he's written and in which he performs. It pits a lonely maverick against a complacent establishment. And no, it's not about Gary Lineker. It's the story of the Hungarian doctor Ignaz Semmelweis, who in the 19th century, before we understood germs, pioneered antiseptic procedures to combat pure peril fever that killed many mothers after childbirth. The poor man, nonetheless, met a very terrible end. Stefan Kyriazis has been along to see the play. Well, it's a pretty unusual topic, but you had a very good time, didn't you?
I did. It's a huge topic. It's a fascinating topic, and it's about what was happening then and very much about what's happening now. The man, he died at 47 in an insane asylum, and critically, from an infection. When he'd spent his whole life's work talking about the cleaning of hands, the cleaning of wounds, he died from an infection in an insane asylum. He was discredited, disgraced. 20 years after his death, Louis Pasteur starts the whole theory of germs and bacteria. It's a huge, huge topic. We've been washing our hands for a couple of years. You know, it relates into what we've been going through now, and very much establishment versus genius coming through with a new idea. And at the heart of it, we have Mark Rylance, who is doing his usual idiosyncratic, immersive anti-hero. He loves a character that is unlikable. The crucial problem with Semmelweis was he was absolutely no good at listening to anybody else, at allowing them to disagree with him. Once he believed something, he absolutely furiously denounced them. So just before his death, he wrote to doctors across the whole of Europe and basically said, if you don't engage in these procedures, you are murderers. He called the entire establishment of Europe murderers. And he didn't allow people to come to him. So there's a huge passage in it, which is really fascinating about, he talks about ignorance is not a sin, it's the suppression of knowledge and truth. His friends argue, allow people to come to you. A half-truth is halfway to the truth. He would say a half-truth is worse than a lie. And what do we have now? We have a whole world of people scream at each other about their own truths and absolutely denouncing and hating anybody that will not believe their own absolute truth. So there's a lot going on.
We had a fellow in London, historically, called John Snow, who observed that cholera outbreaks occurred around certain water fountains, public water fountains, and he tracked it all on a map and decided that the cholera must be related to the water. This story is somewhat similar, isn't it? Because Semmelweis was comparing doctors who are delivering babies with midwives who are delivering babies, and the morbidity, the rate of death with the doctors was much higher. So was he a genius, or was he just very good at observing and questioning?
Well, this is also ultimately what genius is. It's the ability to make that final leap, to make the link. There was this. Did
he know it was germs, or did he just think there's something about washing here?
He had a theory about decaying matter. So he made the link between the fact that the doctors were also performing autopsies. So the nurses were not allowed...
Oh, wow.
The nurses weren't allowed to be actually educated to a higher level, so they weren't allowed into these teaching, but the doctors were. So they would come from autopsies with their hands covered, and so his theory was based in decaying matter. That's what he believed. Whereas before that, they just thought there was something in the air. If you open a window, things will disappear. So he made that link, and it's this idea of genius and how difficult geniuses can be as well, and how often in their own time they're not listened to and not believed. So there's so much going on.
Tell me about the performance. You said he's attracted to playing an unattractive character. I mean, are you on the edge of your seat? Are you gripped
It's a very different one. This is a very, very immersive. It's an uncomfortable watch because he is very unlikable. I mean, in Jerusalem, he played Rooster, and Rooster is a drug-dealing gypsy. However, he's also hugely entertaining. He's charismatic. This character is the absolute opposite of this. He's very difficult. So he's not a fun watch. But instead, we have 7 ballerinas on stage. I think 6 ballerinas and 1 male ballet dancer, because the first woman he lost was a ballet dancer. They haunt the proceedings. They also dance on stage. Rylance dances with them. He's 63. He lifts a ballerina overhead. There's a string quartet around the audience. They pop up in boxes either side of the stage. Rylance, being Rylance, climbs down from the box onto the stage. So he always brings an awful lot to it. And he has always said he relates to outsiders himself. He always feels like he is going against the grain. He doesn't believe that Shakespeare, for example, wrote his entire body of works. He took garlic in the early days of COVID. He wouldn't take the vaccine. And he has very publicly spoken out against political correctness in casting. He believes it's better to come to it as an immigrant, he says.
Are we allowed,
outsider.
Do you allow yourself to do some interpretation of what this is about? You mentioned people throwing slogans at each other and not representing that half a truth can get you further towards the truth. You've also mentioned his stand, if it was that, on vaccination. Do you feel these themes are coming out strongly in the play, or is that too asinine to make those connections?
No, very much so. I think what it was I'm not sure I completely enjoyed the play while I was watching it. It's an uncomfortable watch. There's uncomfortable truths. His performance is uncomfortable. His character is a difficult character. What I found was, in that great way afterwards, with a little bit of kind of self-educating as well, afterwards it lingered, and I kept thinking about more and more and more about it. And that, of course, ultimately is what wonderful things that theatre can do.
Shall we talk about the strikes? Hollywood is somewhat paralysed. The screenwriters are out, the actors are out. We're not going to see celebrities at premieres.
Absolutely.
Is this for quite a long period of time, do you think?
This is seismic. I mean, Brian Cox recently has come out and said he thinks it's going to go on for the rest of the year. There was an uncredited but source in Deadline in America, one of the main industry rags, that a studio executive was quoted, unnamed, as saying the studios are happy for this to drag on as long as possible because they want the writers especially on their knees. And it all, of course, is boiling down to money. But Hollywood, this hasn't happened since 1960, when, for example, Ronald Reagan was president of the Screen Actors Guild at the time.
I mean, it's partly about streaming, isn't it? And it's partly about AI. So streaming means that people are not getting the residuals that they've been used to.
Yes.
And AI, the dispute there seems to be that although there are some guarantees for actors who are, as it were, in the foreground, anybody who's in the background, their image can just be, well, let's face it, stolen.
Yeah, I mean, it's all boiling down to the little man, the regular man. So all the people speaking out are the big names, and they have the voice. But it's actually the effect on the jobbing actors, the actors that don't work all the time, same with writers. So they rely on these residuals, because things are repeated constantly on network television in America, for repeat fees. And, you know, it's been said this pays their rent sometimes and their medical insurance.
There's another thing. If they don't earn $26,000 in a year, they don't qualify for the medical insurance.
Yes.
So that's yet another issue. And big actors, obviously, who are not short of a bob or two or a dollar or two, they're coming out in support. And
they are very much. I mean, they've walked off red carpets. So we saw Robert Downey Jr., Emily Blunt, everybody walking off the Oppenheimer red carpet in London on Thursday night. So yes, they're very much behind it. Productions are grinding to a halt. This is an absolute halt. Anything that's filming now has to stop. Anything that has been filmed cannot be promoted in any way, not even on social media. But also, crucially, this dominoes into the future because they can't go for auditions. They can't have meetings to talk about potential future projects. They can't do hair and makeup tests. So it's going all the way across, and it will actually, whenever the strike ends, it will still ripple through for a long time. I mean, this is 160,000 performers that are on strike. It's absolutely huge.
I think we better get used to watching repeats, don't you? That's where it's going. Thank you very much, Stefan Kyriazis. It was a while since I'd seen you, and I'm so pleased to see you back on the show. How have the hours racked and tortured me since I lost thee, because it's a Shakespeare day for us today. Well, that's it for this hour, but stay with us. I'll be back in a few minutes with lots more, including our ethical debate on whether efforts to boost the number of rape convictions will undermine the presumption of innocence. That's at 12 o'clock. See you then.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. We are still holding onto a relatively fresh breeze for many of us through Sunday. Low pressure is gradually pushing its way northwards from the UK, but there's still plenty of isobars on the chart, and particularly for southern areas of Scotland down into northeast England, we could see gusts of 40 miles per hour throughout the day, so quite blustery. Longer spells of rain for western Scotland. Elsewhere, there'll be some scattered heavy showers around, thunderstorms perhaps in places as well. Some localised flooding across Aberdeenshire is possible. But where you see some of the sunnier spells in between, temperatures climb to highs around 20, 22 degrees Celsius, but feeling much cooler underneath that more persistent cloud and rain in the northwest, and that will continue throughout the night. So quite a wet 24 hours to come here. Elsewhere, some of those showers will ease off throughout the night, allowing for some clearer spells to develop. And underneath those clearer spells, and because the winds are a touch lighter compared to recent nights, temperatures will dip away a bit more, down to around 11, 12 degrees Celsius. Where you have those clear spells overnight, it means that you'll be greeted by a good amount of sunshine first thing on Monday morning, and many of us will see those sunny spells throughout the day. Still some scattered showers bubbling up throughout the afternoon, and particularly central, eastern, southeastern areas of England could see some of those turning quite heavy with some thunderstorms and hail in the mixture. But again, in that sunshine, temperatures climb to highs of around 18 to 23 degrees Celsius. Some longer spells of rain possible for some of us, though, as we head towards Tuesday. Otherwise, enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo, and good afternoon. I have another hour of debate, arts and indeed nature, as we'll be looking at the reintroduction of the beloved by some beaver to the English landscape. It's the first time that the industrial mammal has roamed fairly freely in English waters in 400 years. Before that, though, we'll have our ethical debate. This week we're considering efforts by the police and the Home Office to boost the number of convictions for rape. How do we do that without infringing on the right of the defendant to the presumption of innocence and a fair trial? We'll have two perspectives on that. I'll be joined in the studio also by Tomiwa Owolade, whose new book, This Is Not America, explores the unique experience of black British people and laments the inappropriate adoption by many in Britain of a distinctly American discourse on race relations. And as I teased at the start of the programme, I've taken a private tour around a staggering concentration of beautiful artworks at the National Gallery in London. As the curator of the exhibition After Impressionism, Inventing Modern Art identifies when art moved on from largely portraying a pretty moment in time and made new demands of artists and audiences. All that to come after the news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Michael, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, the top story today is that the UK has become the first European country to formally join the Indo-Pacific trade bloc, potentially creating access to £12 trillion worth of global business. Well, the Business and Trade Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, who's in Auckland for the signing, says the deal will bring British businesses a step closer to selling to a market of over 500 million people, but with fewer barriers. Some everyday items from countries within the bloc, such as Australian Ugg boots, for example, could become cheaper for consumers. It's estimated the agreement will come into effect at the end of next year. Nigel Huddleston, International Trade Minister, told GB News earlier the deal will help to grow the UK economy.
We're talking about billions of pounds of additional economic activity right across the country. It will benefit every nation and region of the UK. It's not just about where we are now, but where this could go in the future as well, because we expect the membership of CPTPP to expand over the coming years. So I wouldn't be too obsessed with the current numbers. This is about the potential growth for the UK economy.
Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said that the trade deal was a start, but more action was needed.
Any trade deal is good. I wouldn't call this one massive, but it's certainly not a plan for growth. And the problem is we've not had a plan for growth for 13 years under this government. We still haven't got a plan for growth. So, yes, look, a trade deal is always a step in the right direction, but this is not a plan for growth, and it's that failure to have a plan for growth that's left us in the economic mess that we're in.
The Home Secretary has published a letter she's written to Sir Keir Starmer, claiming that a Labour staffer met with Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion activists in private meetings. Suella Braverman claims that internal memos from Just Stop Oil showed MP Jess Morden met with the environmental groups to sell them on how Labour is still driven by the environment. The Home Secretary called for the sacking of Miss Morden and for all office holders within the party to cut contact, in her words, with the extremist groups. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is to give up his government position at the next cabinet reshuffle and not stand as an MP at the next general election, according to today's Sunday Times. It comes just days after the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak rejected comments by Mr Wallace suggesting Ukraine should be more grateful for the military support the UK's shown. And Matt Goodwin, Professor of Politics at the University of Kent, says it represents wider problems, though, for the Conservative Party.
It's coming only a few days before those very awkward by-elections for Rishi Sunak. It's coming amidst a wider sense in the country that the Conservatives are in disarray. We've got 40 Conservatives standing down at the next election. This is a seismic number for the Conservative Party, and it all adds to a sense that people are now really concluding that this party is heading for defeat and it's time to do something different.
Surgical procedures for more than 8,000 children have had to be cancelled in Scotland since 2019, according to the Liberal Democrats. They're describing the newly released data as a badge of shame for the SNP government. The Scottish Lib Dems say many operations were cancelled due to lack of staff or equipment. A Scottish Government spokesperson responded by saying the impact of COVID-19 on the normal day-to-day running of NHS hospitals could not be underestimated. Former soldiers could be called upon to join a reserve force in future crises. The Sunday Telegraph newspaper today reports it's part of a planned overhaul of the military, which could reduce the British Army to its smallest size since the Napoleonic Wars. Ministers are expected to defend the proposals, part of the long-awaited Defence Command paper, insisting the war in Ukraine shows how UK forces can become more agile. The army currently consists of more than 75,000 personnel. The paper's reporting the government's announcing plans to cut it to 73,000. You're watching GB News. More news as it happens. Back now to Michael.
Thank you very much, Polly. It was reported this week that all 43 of England's police forces are to adopt new proposals from the Home Office in order to boost the number of successful prosecutions for rape. Operation Soteria is a new model of police investigation which will put the emphasis during inquiries squarely on the alleged perpetrator rather than on the supposed credibility of the complainant. 2,000 police investigators are to be trained in these new methods. Campaigners say there's been a drastic fall in the number of rape cases reaching court since 2016. I'm joined to discuss this by Katerina Tsipouklis in the studio, a solicitor representing defendants accused of the most serious crimes, including murder and sexual offences. And joining me remotely is the journalist Rebecca Reid. Rebecca Reid, thank you very much for joining us on GB News. What, in your view, is needed? What kind of change is needed?
I mean, I think it's like broad-scale societal, like deep change, unfortunately, which is obviously like the hardest kind to create. But there is still a pervasive sense that when somebody says they have been raped, there is an assumption that they might be lying, that it might be malicious, or that they might in some way have brought it on themselves. And there is still a sort of expectation that a woman needs to have behaved a certain way, which is to have been dressed a certain way, to have been a certain level of sober, and to have not put herself, using that term very lightly, in a position where a man is able to rape her. All of the burden of not getting raped still falls on women, and all of the questions about why somebody has been raped all still seem to hinge on what she did to make that happen, not the rapist did to make the rape happen. And that is an incredibly hard thing to change because it's a societal attitude. But unfortunately, we see from all of the research that the people who are often in charge of being the first line of defence in the police are some of the worst exponents of these behaviours and these beliefs. And unfortunately, because there is an massive over-representation in the police of people who are accused of these kinds of crimes and who have a history of domestic violence and abuse, your chances of being confronted by somebody who not only believes these things, but maybe even perpetrates them is worryingly high.
What do you make of the proposals that are being made as part of Operation Soteria?
I think the difficulty is, whenever there is an attempt to improve this situation, it's really easy to be like, that's not going to work, it's not worth it. And none of these things on their own in isolation will fix the problem. But being hypercritical of them then means that nothing gets done. And then you end up in a situation where conviction rates are falling, which should be, given the sheer amount of campaign work, given that we're in a post-Me Too era, given that education for teenagers is supposed to be focused on consent, things should be getting better and they're not. So I am always skeptical of anything involving the police, because I think the way that the police, what I believe in broadly speaking, I believe in defunding the police. But I think this feels like
you believe in defunding the police. You think that defunding the police would help to increase successful prosecutions of rape?
I think defunding the police in its current in the way that it's currently run, yes, because they are effectively expected to be social workers with truncheons, and it's an unrealistic expectation. And the person who comes to talk to you when you are reporting a rape should not be the same person who breaks up a fight on a street corner outside McDonald's at 3 a.m. And the problem is at the moment, in the way that it's funded, in the way that it's run, those two skill sets are expected to exist within the same person, and that person is fairly poorly paid and given very little training. So the whole system basically doesn't work. And this initiative does feel like an attempt to change that, but it's a small number of people. I would be interested to see what the training actually sort of consists of, because it's very easy to send people on a half-day course and then be like, there you go, you've ended the stigma of sexual violence. It's a lifelong learned message trying to deprogram. It's not like, it can't be like a speed awareness course. It needs to be proper ongoing educational work.
So although you're in despair about both societal attitudes and the system, it sounds like you are willing to give these proposals a fair wind, to treat them fairly.
I think so, because you can't be somebody like me who complains about this all the time, and I do complain about it all the time, because it is, it should be a source of national embarrassment that our conviction rates for this are so woeful. You can't sort of sit there complaining about it and then write off every attempt to make anything better. And I think, will it change everything overnight? No, but is a suggestion of people being better trained and better equipped to deal with one of the hardest crimes to investigate a good thing? Of course, it has to be. At least I hope it will be, because I do genuinely think there are women all over this country who are regularly being treated incredibly poorly by the people they turn to protect them.
Rebecca Reed, thank you very much for joining us. So I turn now to Katerina Sibuklis, who's with me in the studio. The proposals that you've seen so far, do they have your support? Do they cause you any concern?
I do have some concern. I think the system as it is does work ultimately. And the potential for these proposals is that they will kind of put in place more stringent measures to effectively ensure that complainants are protected throughout criminal proceedings. Generally, this is to be welcomed because, of course, this is a very sensitive area. And, I appreciate Rebecca's point that, we need better training. This is a cultural issue. But we must also bear in mind that defendants are on the back foot from the moment they're arrested. They're already at a massive disadvantage because they've been arrested and because these kinds of cases carry so much societal stigma. And there are a lot of jury kind of preconceived notions about a defendant in these types of cases. They may come into court and sit in the dock with the dock officer next to them, sometimes from prison. And so, the jury may form a view of the defendant, before any evidence has even been heard. So whilst it's important we have these protective measures in place, we must remember that the onus is on the prosecution to prove their case against the defendant. And so it's important that we bear in mind that kind of the credibility of the complainant is a live issue in any case of this nature.
Given that this is a crime that most frequently occurs behind closed doors and therefore comes down to believing one version of events or another, are you dismayed by the rate of cases coming to trial and by the conviction rate, or do you think that's kind of what we should expect, given the nature of the crime, given the nature of trying to prove what happened in that event?
I think if we get too focused on conviction rates, on securing conviction rates, we end up in a very undesirable position. And that position would be, potentially infringing a defendant's right to a fair trial, which has to be the fundamental principle in the UK criminal justice system. We have one of the best justice systems in the world. And I think, it's really important that we uphold a defendant's right to a fair trial and we presume that they are innocent until they are proven guilty. At the moment, anyone accused of these types of offences can have their name plastered all over the news and almost end up in a kind of trial by media situation. That's not to say we shouldn't protect complainants. We absolutely should, and we should certainly...
How far can you take that? For example, is it legitimate for a complainant to be cross-examined?
I think it's perfectly legitimate for a complainant to be cross-examined. I think they should be cross-examined. The current system we have means that there is judicial oversight over the kinds of questions that a complainant can be asked in a criminal trial. So those questions are proposed in advance of the trial by the advocate, and the judge can kind of question whether or not those questions are necessary and relevant to the case. But it's important that we have that process because as a defence lawyer, we know how important it is that you can put forward your case in a criminal trial to ensure that the trial is conducted fairly.
And what about going to the credibility of the complainant? I mean, I think of things like records of text messages and things like that. Is that a vital tool for the defence?
Absolutely. Of course, that is always going to be relevant. For example, we see that at the moment, as part of the disclosure process, the prosecution will have to tell the defence if, for example, the complainant has previously made a false allegation. We may learn information about the complainant's previous sexual history, and all of that is important to any criminal trial. And if a complainant makes this type of complaint, it's always important that we ensure that they are a credible witness and that the jury is able to properly test their evidence, which means bringing them into court, say for in certain circumstances where it may not be appropriate, but bringing them to court, asking them questions, and the jury being able to form a view of them as a witness.
Katerina Saboukas, thank you very much for coming in on a Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, and talking to us about this very, very serious subject. After the break, we'll be joined by Tomiwa Owolade to discuss his new book, This Is Not America, which challenges us to focus on the specifics of race relations in Britain without being distracted by what happens in the United States, whose history is so very different.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. July's relatively showery theme will be continuing over the next few days. Low pressure is gradually pushing its way off towards the north, so the winds will be easing, but for the time being, southern areas of Scotland down into north-east England could still see some blustery winds into the start of this evening. Some longer spells of rain for northern and western Scotland. Elsewhere, the thunderstorms and heavy showers we have seen will slowly be easing their way out, and underneath some of those clearer skies, temperatures will just drop down to around 11-12 degrees Celsius overnight. Might drop into single figures in some rural spots as well. It does though mean that we'll see a decent amount of sunshine first thing on Monday morning, but we will then see those scattered showers developing once again as we head throughout the day, particularly for eastern, central, southeastern areas of England. Some of those could be quite heavy in nature, maybe with some thunderstorms again and some hail possible also. But there will be some sunshine in between those scattered showers, and with winds lighter compared to the weekend, it will just feel that bit warmer. Temperatures ranging between 18 and 23 degrees Celsius. For Tuesday, though, we have to watch as our next low pressure centre is going to push its way in from the west. So turning quite damp first thing on Tuesday morning for Northern Ireland, and that rain will then steadily progress its way into parts of northern Wales, northern England and then Scotland later on. The far south-east generally staying drier, but there is still the chance of further showers as we do head towards the rest of the week. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. After the murder of George Floyd in the US city of Minneapolis, London and other cities in the United Kingdom saw passionate protests demanding racial justice. Some even chanted the slogan, made famous by the Black Lives Matter movement, "Hands up, don't shoot," despite the fact that British police famously rarely carry firearms. It struck my next guest as a peculiar response, given Britain's history of race relations, which is, he says, checkered, but absolutely different from the United States' experience. It prompted him to write, "This is not America, why Black Lives in Britain matter." And I'm delighted to say that Tomiwa Owolade joins me now. Welcome to GB News. Do you want to set out fairly briefly the thesis of your book?
So in my book, This is Not America, I argue that when we think about race in the UK, we should think about it through a UK context because the Black British population is different in many relevant ways from the Black American population. So in terms of demographics, for example, Black people constitute about 13% of the American population, whereas in the UK, Black people only constitute about 4% of the UK's population. And there is far wider internal diversity within the Black British population. So in America, for example, over 90% of Black Americans are the descendants of enslaved Africans that were transported between the 17th and the 19th centuries. Whereas in the UK, the striking thing is that the overwhelming majority of Black British people are either immigrants or the children of immigrants from Africa. So up until 25 years ago, to be Black British meant mostly to be Black Caribbean. But over the past 25 years, there's been a massive influx of immigration from Africa, which has completely changed the demographic makeup of the Black British population. So there are twice as many Black African people as there are Black Caribbean people. And I think when we think about what it means to be Black and British, it's not just one singular thing. It's something which is evolving. And I think that needs to be incorporated into conversations around race in the UK.
I suppose some people might say those are jolly interesting points.
Yeah.
But if on both sides of the Atlantic, Black people are facing racism, which is holding them back and distorting their outcomes, then it is appropriate to think across countries and continents.
It's appropriate, but I think it's appropriate at a very superficial level. So if we think about something like education, for example, the experiences of Black British people in the educational system is not something that you can just assume simply on the basis of race. So there are many Black British communities that are struggling in education, but there are others that are actually thriving. So, for example, Black Caribbean pupils are more than 3 times more likely to be excluded from schools than Black African pupils. Black African pupils, in fact, are less likely to be excluded from schools than white British pupils. So when we talk about things like inequality and disadvantage, we need to be more specific in our focus rather than just looking at it through the lens of race.
So it is not your thesis that there is not racism in Britain. What do you feel about racism in Britain? Where do you think it exists?
Yeah, so I do think there is racism in Britain. There is racism in some British institutions. Some British people espouse racist views. I don't argue in my book that we live in a sort of post-racist society. I don't think so. What I do argue is when we think about racism, we need to look at it through context. And we also need to acknowledge the fact that racism is not the only thing that explains inequality and disadvantage in society. I also argue that we should not look at Black people or any other ethnic minority people through the lens of their racial background, because to do so is to replicate the same kind of racializing view that racists do.
You could have argued those topics under any title, but you've actually argued it under the title, This Is Not America.
Yes.
Implying to me that you see quite a danger in using the wrong lens to view this subject.
Yes.
So, for example, when you saw the response to Black Lives Matter, to the killing in Minneapolis, when you saw, I don't know, footballers taking the knee and so on, did you feel there were dangers here, or did you just think, oh, these people are intellectually confused?
I think it's dangerous because I think it actually obscures what's actually going on in the UK. And I think the response to the murder of George Floyd in America led to what I consider to be an extremely patronizing attitude from often well-meaning liberal, left and progressive people.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, because I felt that after that response, they simply saw Black people as victims and nothing else. And I think that kind of attitude to race and race relations is extremely patronizing because the experience of Black and ethnic minority people is not simply defined through the experience of racism.
So the paradox here that well-meaning people, as you put it, were in fact being racist because they saw Black people as all the same thing. Are you going that far?
I wouldn't call them racist.
No. Okay.
But I do think that that kind of attitude is dangerous precisely because it puts too much of an emphasis on race to the exclusion of all the other aspects of somebody's identity. And I also found it dangerous because I think any approach to trying to combat racism needs to be collaborative. And I felt all too often there was a kind of stigma attached to being white, essentially, a kind of, which I find completely counterproductive and completely divisive. And I think any approach to combating racism, any actually effective form of anti-racism needs to be collaborative and needs to be approached with a greater degree of good faith than what I saw in the summer of 2020.
What's the appropriate attitude for a white person like me towards Britain's colonial past? How should I deal with it?
Curiosity, and genuine curiosity, not the kind of moralizing, sort of sanctimonious attitude that I see many people approach Britain's colonial past, which just sees it as a kind of zero-sum game. It's either completely terrible or completely wonderful. And I think any genuinely curious approach to history would view it in a more nuanced and a more sophisticated way.
May I ask you just very briefly, people can hear what you've argued in this book.
Yes.
Are you being cancelled? Are you getting hostility?
Well, the response has been very broadly positive, but there are some people that obviously disagree with me, but some people as well that see me as a kind of race traitor, but they are a small minority. They're a fringe, basically.
Thank you so much for coming on GB News. The book is called This Is Not America, Why Black Lives in Britain Matter, Tom Owolade. In a few minutes, we'll hear from the Beaver Trust, which has just helped to reintroduce the famously busy species into the English landscape for the first time in 4 centuries. Before that, though, here's an update on the main headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Michael, thank you. The headlines this hour: the UK has become the first European country to formally join the Indo-Pacific trade bloc, potentially creating access to £12 trillion worth of global business. Business and Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch says the deal will bring British businesses a step closer to selling to a market of 500 million people plus, but with fewer barriers. Everyday items from countries within the bloc, like Australian Ugg boots, for example, could become cheaper. It's estimated the agreement will come into effect towards the end of next year. The Home Secretary has published a letter to Sir Keir Starmer claiming a Labour staffer met with Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion activists in private meetings. Suella Braverman claimed that internal memos from Just Stop Oil showed MP Jess Mordaunt met with the environmental groups to sell them on how Labour is driven by the environment. The Home Secretary called for the sacking of Miss Mordaunt and for all office holders within the party to cut contact with what she called extremist groups. But Sir Keir Starmer has rebuffed the claims, saying none of his team are meeting with Just Stop Oil. And surgical procedures for more than 8,000 children have had to be cancelled in Scotland since 2019. That's according to the Liberal Democrats. They're describing the newly released data as a badge of shame for the SNP government. The Scottish Lib Dems say many operations were cancelled due to a lack of staff or equipment. The Scottish Government has responded, saying the impact of COVID-19 on the normal day-to-day running of NHS hospitals could not be underestimated. More on all those stories, head to our website, gbnews.com.
Thank you very much, Polly. No mention today of the dam busters, but a feature on dam builders. Beavers are mammals with a phenomenal work ethic, who, sadly for them, became highly sought after for their fur pelts and were almost wiped out. In England, the Eurasian species was made extinct 4 centuries ago. But now a group of campaigners is working to reintroduce them, beginning with 2 adult beavers in the River Wansbeck in Northumberland. So far, all reintroductions of the beaver are taking place within enclosed land. But could they be allowed once again to roam at will without damaging the other needs and interests of the countryside? I'm joined by Dr. Rob Needham from the Beaver Trust. Welcome to GB News. Thank you very much for coming on. Obviously, the Beaver Trust is going to be in favour of beavers, and I think they're very cute, furry animals. But I understand that beaver dams can cause local flooding, and that beavers are very indiscriminate in knocking down trees at a time when we're told that we need trees to combat climate change. And it is very striking that they're being introduced in restricted areas from which they cannot roam at large. Can you respond to those points, please?
Yes, I can. So, yes, their damming activity can cause localised flooding. However, plenty of research and practical management throughout Europe has proven there's effective methods to mitigate against these. With regards to the tree felling, our native trees are adapted, they've co-evolved with beavers. So what they do is generally they regenerate, they coppice. So those trees majority don't actually necessarily die, so they regenerate.
And what is the argument for the reintroduction of the beaver?
So beavers, they're a keystone species. They were native. So by keystone, it has a considerable impact on other biodiversity. So many other species and taxonomic groups benefit from the wetland habitats that can be created if the dams are allowed to remain in place. They also, in terms of, obviously, we're in the middle of a global climate crisis. Great Britain is one of the most nature-depleted countries in Europe. So by bringing these beavers back and allowing them in particular places to actually see the benefits that they can bring.
I suppose we could create the wetland environment ourselves. I mean, human beings could build little beaver-like dams without having the byproducts of actually having the industrious little creatures out there.
No, that's a fair point. However, all of that comes at a cost. So a lot of natural flood management projects that have been implemented can be proven to work and do work. However, beavers do it more effectively than us, less environmental impact, and yes, it's cheaper.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rob Needham. It's quite a controversial subject, although the creatures are very, very cute, and I think we're all rather appalled at the way humanity wiped them out. We'll see how that one develops. After the break, I'm going to explore 8 rooms of some of the world's most precious art at the National Gallery. Their value lies not just in their beauty, but their significance in the history of art. They helped to usher in and to define the modern age.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. In London's National Gallery, visitors can see 8 rooms packed with modern masterpieces in an exhibition that has a month to run. I was lucky enough to receive a tour from the exhibition's curator, Mary-Anne Stevens, who has authoritatively charted the break from Impressionism that took place towards the end of the 19th century and which inaugurated a radically different visual world. The Impressionist painters held their last exhibition in Paris in 1886. And after that, there was much debate about in what direction European art should move. Painters like Paul Cézanne, Paul Gauguin, Vincent van Gogh had one set of answers. And as we moved into the 20th century, Gustav Klimt, Henri Matisse, Pablo Picasso had yet more radical responses. This exhibition, After Impressionism, Inventing Modern Art, at the National Gallery, tells the story of European painting and sculpture in the 3 decades before the First World War. Mary-Anne, is there a break point in art after the last exhibition by the Impressionists?
I would believe fundamentally that there is. And it was a moment where actually even that last exhibition, which was in 1886, which is where we start this exhibition here, was already showing tensions amongst the Impressionists. And so they were each going their own somewhat independent ways.
What sort of ways were they going?
They were questioning once again whether actually just painting a fleeting moment in time was really the primary ambition of art. Yes, it was truth to the moment, but it mightn't necessarily give a greater weight to the meaning of that particular work. And the person who was responsible for getting them thinking in these terms was actually the author, Émile Zola, who wrote a rather scathing critique of Impressionism in 1880, basically saying it's great what they've done so far, but actually they're still stammering. They haven't actually found a voice to turn them into the old masters. So when you get to 1886, that really is the end of that group in terms of group exhibitions, and they are, as I say, already going their own way.
Exhibition begins with Paul Cézanne. I think a lot of people might think that Cézanne was an impressionist, but you're implying that this painting takes us beyond.
Absolutely, because in fact, Cézanne only exhibited twice with the Impressionists. He wasn't a devoted exhibitor, like, for example, Pissarro or Degas or whoever. And so he really always held himself a little bit apart. And when you look at the work that he's producing, even in the 1860s and 70s, it doesn't really chime very closely with what the Impressionists were about. You put a Cézanne of the 1870s next to a Monet, and I'm afraid you're looking at two very different approaches, if you like. So by starting with Cézanne here, and this wonderful Great Bathers, painting one of 3 large-scale bathers that Cézanne made at the end of his last decade of his life, you are really posing the question, which direction is he going in next? And is he still committed to some modicum of representing the external world as we would recognize it? Or is he actually saying, no, I'm going to do something really quite fundamentally different? And what he's doing is he's looking at these figures and he's analyzing their forms, the fundamental structures of their forms, and then describing them as a series of very simplified volumes, which he reinforces in terms of simplification by the way in which he handles his paint. Because the paint is actually light and shadow, slabs, rather than subtle graduation, modulation from light to shade. And that kind of almost creates a notion of a faceted figure, faceted surface, which actually lies at the basis of Cubism.
Fascinating. Now, alongside Cézanne, in the latter years of the 19th century, Paul Gauguin is going in his direction, and Vincent van Gogh, as we call him without English accents, is going in another direction. Tell me a little bit about those two.
Well, in terms of Gauguin, he's really posed a fundamental question, which was effectively what was sitting in Cézanne's mind, which is if you're no longer going to paint the external world as it is represented, then where does art go? What is your responsibility as an artist? And for Gauguin, he basically pushed naturalism to one side and said, I'm now going to seek non-naturalism as a way basically of drawing attention of the spectator to the fact that he's painting big ideas, fundamental emotions, not just a pretty picture of Breton women, for example, sitting on a grassy meadow. By that I mean basically you break with the notion that when the artist puts his canvas up in front of a motif or creates an image in the studio, he's basically painting a recognizable form. So a figure takes a perfectly logical three-dimensional shape. It sits totally logically within a space which is defined. Now, with Gauguin, he flattens all that out. He basically says, I'm not interested in spatial recession. It's nothing to do with me. I'm actually showing you that I'm pushing in a direction which has nothing to do with your expectation. Vincent van Gogh also absolutely comes into the picture. In this exhibition, one will notice that we only have works from the last 2 years of his life. Up until that point, after he moved from Paris to Arles to set up his studio of the South, he basically was painting still in a style which was derived from a bit of Seurat, Neo-Impressionism, a bit of Monet and Impressionism. But come the early summer, he really starts exploring his own visual voice. And what he does is he simplifies form, he heightens his palette, absolutely becomes much richer, more dynamic. And he basically, very importantly, makes the spectator focus on how the painting is made rather than what it is describing. So you were aware of these extraordinary ladling on of paint or very thin areas of paint where you're actually looking, you're asked to look at how does this work? What is he trying to do with his technique in order to tell us something about the atmosphere or the mood of this particular landscape?
Well, you've made a very convincing case for there being a break point at the end of the 1880s. Shall we move on?
Yes.
Marianne, the artist we've been talking about had a very strong connection with France, but of course there were artistic developments across Europe, and this painting helps us to understand that, doesn't it?
Absolutely. One of the intentions of the exhibition was not to unseat Paris, because Paris was like a magnet. Artists and collectors just swarmed to Paris because it really was the capital of the arts from the mid-1850s onwards. But at the same time, there were in other European cities, there was a move to establish avant-garde exhibition bodies, which opened their platform, if you like, to artists who were being certainly more experimental, like Klimt, for example. And so what we have is covering Barcelona, Brussels, Berlin, and Vienna, which is where we are now. We're basically saying all four of these cities had these very interesting, very positive, outward-going determinations to have a platform for avant-garde artists. And in the case of Vienna, it all hinges on the establishment of an organization called the Secession, because they seceded from the conventional, traditional art establishment in order to have their own exhibition. And this was in 1898. And Klimt was a leading figure in that creation.
Tell me about this particular painting by Klimt, not one that I've seen before.
No, this is an extraordinary work. It's in a private collection, so it's rarely seen. It is the second of two portraits that Klimt made, Gustav Klimt, of the sitter Adele Bloch-Bauer. This is Bloch-Bauer number 2. Bloch-Bauer number 1 is sitting in New York. And it is really an incredibly important work because it shows him moving forward as a result of having come for the first time to Paris. It is extraordinary that he felt no urge to have to come and see what was going on in Paris, which was pretty energetic, to put it mildly. You've got Matisse, you've got Derain, you've got Picasso, and so on. But actually, that wasn't what he was interested in. But in 1907, he took the decision to go to Paris. And the impact is really immediate, because here we have an artist who, having in a previous portrait of 1904, which is in the National Gallery's collection, still is an element of three-dimensionality, and it's rather Whistlerian, actually. Here we have him bold outline, flattened colour infill. It becomes a patterned surface. And she is basically a wonderful kind of sequence of serpentine lines, which defines her extremely smart, absolutely up to the moment dress, which she's standing in. But even more than that, it is, I think, a very important work, because it shows where his own interests as an artist lay, quite apart from Paris and what he was learning from there, which is, if you look in the background, we have this extraordinary, is it a tapestry, is it a frieze, we're not quite certain, which seems to consist of Chinese figures. So he's basically using that as a way of reinforcing the decorative quality of this. So going back to what we were talking about earlier, this is not naturalistic. This is decorative, this is non-natural.
This is from a private collection. Will there be a number of paintings here with which we're unfamiliar?
Yes, there's a very high percentage, actually, as temporary exhibitions go. We've got about a third of the exhibition comes from private collections. And that is, I regard, very important. Not only does it allow us to identify major works on a par with, masterpieces sitting in museums, which are seen by the public, but bringing these out and making them available to the visitor is really, I think, very important. But secondly, it also does reinforce in the collector's mind the significance of the work that they've acquired. So it takes on its historical significance, if you like.
You mentioned Barcelona, which made me think of Pablo Picasso, who spent a period of his life painting in Barcelona. Shall we move on and look at Picasso, and you can tell us about the end of the story?
Yes, absolutely.
Marianne, you have a fair number of Picassos in the exhibition, and we can see the development within that artist's work. And here is a Picasso from 1909. What stage has he reached here?
What is fascinating about Picasso is how quickly he moves. What he's doing in Barcelona and in Paris at the beginning of the 20th century, 1900, 1901, 1902, really shifts dramatically by the time we get to here. And if you look at those early works, you think, how did he get here? And really what he's doing is he's taking the next step from Cézanne. And whereas Cézanne was obviously analysing form and giving us these faceted descriptions of volume in simplified form, Picasso does one step further. He basically says, if I'm painting the head of Fernande, his mistress, I need to tell you all the information I can see, I can identify about this face. So he works his way around from a number of individual perspectival points in order to give us this incredibly faceted effect.
Much more difficult for the viewer.
Oh, I think much more difficult for the viewer. And in fact, when you look at it, it's only that gradually you realize there's a table with rather wonky legs, with a still life, which, as with Cézanne's still lifes, actually seem to be cascading down the table. So they're not held stably in 3 dimensions. And likewise, with the drapery on the right-hand side, which is maybe a curtain or whatever, the simplification of the folds is geometric. It's nothing to do with how fabric just hangs gently, off a curtain.
It's a glorious exhibition. It's beautifully laid out in these sumptuous rooms. You've a magnificent collection of works here. What would you like the visitor to leave thinking?
I would like the visitor to, first of all, understand that Paris was not the only centre of the art world. There were other centres, equally exploratory, equally experimental, producing works of a very high order. And, by artists that the British public isn't really familiar with. And secondly, I think it is to make it available to the visitor to think about, if art is no longer going to describe the external world in a recognisable form, what are the options open to an artist to explore alternative routes? And that gets us all the way to Cubism.
Well, I found it a great privilege to be with these paintings and to hear your explanations. So I thank you for those and for your time.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope the visitor enjoys the visit enormously.
Well, this visitor certainly did. That was a magnificent exhibition, After Impressionism, Inventing Modern Art, at the National Gallery in London. And many thanks indeed to Mary-Ann Stevens. Well, Emily Carver is going to be taking over in just a moment. I can't tell you what a wonderful time I had. I don't know whether you
That's
get...
inspired me to go to the gallery.
Well, do. And what are you going to have on your programme in a moment?
Well, I've got a letter here.
Oh.
Suella Braverman's been very busy this morning, clearly. She's written to Keir Starmer. Quite a bolshy letter. She says that Labour under Keir Starmer's leadership has become the political wing of Just Stop Oil. She doesn't stop there, though. In the letter, she says he should sack his shadow ministers who have expressed sympathy with Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. So I want to get the views of our great viewers and see what they think about that.
Well, it's a marvellous GB News story, I think, that one. Do you have anything else?
No, that's it. Yes, we have loads more. This new trade bloc that we've joined.
Yes.
The Indo-Pacific trade bloc. £12 trillion is what the bloc is worth, apparently, in GDP, and we might get a little snip of that, perhaps. So we'll be discussing that, seeing, will this make our everyday lives better?
You're taking the view that it's just a little snip. It's a huge market that we access, but it just depends how much of that market we're going to get and how much that's going to affect GDP. Thank you very much indeed. Stay with us for Emily Carver, who'll be here at 1 o'clock. I want to thank all my guests today and, of course, the National Gallery for that wonderful tour of their exhibition. I will be back next week. I can't tell you how much I look forward to it. See you then.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. July's relatively showery theme will be continuing over the next few days. Low pressure is gradually pushing its way off towards the north, so the winds will be easing, but for the time being, southern areas of Scotland down into north-east England could still see some blustery winds into the start of this evening. Some longer spells of rain for northern and western Scotland. Elsewhere, the thunderstorms and heavy showers we have seen will slowly be easing their way out, and underneath some of those clearer skies, temperatures will just drop down to around 11-12 degrees Celsius overnight. Might drop into single figures in some rural spots as well. It does, though, mean that we'll see a decent amount of sunshine first thing on Monday morning, but we will then see those scattered showers developing once again as we head throughout the day. Particularly for eastern, central, southeastern areas of England, some of those could be quite heavy in nature, maybe with some thunderstorms again and some hail possible also. But there will be some sunshine in between those scattered showers, and with winds lighter compared to the weekend, it will just feel that bit warmer. Temperatures ranging between 18 and 23 degrees Celsius. For Tuesday, though, we have to watch as our next low pressure centre is going to push its way in from the west. So turning quite damp first thing on Tuesday morning for Northern Ireland, and that rain will then steadily progress its way into parts of northern Wales, northern England and then Scotland later on. The far south-east generally staying drier, but there is still the chance of further showers as we do head towards the rest of the week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.